Hello and welcome to Talking Reds, a Nottingham Forest podcast hosted by myself, Greg Oram, and still not from across the Atlantic, but still here live in the UK, live from Worthing. It's Richard Spray. How you doing, Richard? You okay?
Oh, I'm doing great. Wonderful. Thank you.
Great to have you still with us in the UK. We'll talk more about that as we go through this episode. Following Nottingham Forest's away win at Southampton, we'll take a look at the game and the standout moments. And with the news that the Eddie Nketiah transfer to Arsenal has all but collapsed, Forest go back in with another bid for Feyenoord's Santiago Jimenez. Joining Richard and I once again, it's Dan Skay. How you doing, mate? You okay?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Good. Forest positive result weekend, isn't it? So everything's good with the world.
Absolutely. Everything is perfectly good with the world. So it feels like it was like 10 minutes since we were all together. It was only on Saturday before the game. We jumped on to review the game coming up. And so let's get straight into it. The Southampton game on Saturday. Let's just kind of start at the beginning. Sort of team lineup came out. Before the game, we were talking about what it was going to look like. And I suggested that I think, Yates would be a definite starter with the Danilo injury, and any other changes, perhaps wouldn't be happening. We talked about possibly Milenkovic coming in for Bolly. And Dan, that's exactly what happened. Your idol, Mr. Willy Bolly, was left out for Nikola Milenkovic to make his first start, and Elliot Anderson got his first start of the season, and Ryan Yates was still on the bench. What did you make of the lineup when you saw that, Dan?
Yeah, definitely a surprise. Definitely a bold move away from home. I think if it was a home game, maybe wouldn't have been so surprised, but because it was away from home, just kind of assumed that we'd be sticking to a little bit more tried and tested. But as we'll come on to, it obviously worked out. So yeah, good call by Nuno.
Yeah, I was a bit surprised. I was pleasantly surprised. The point is, we've got options, Richard, haven't we? We've got players in the squad now that arguably, if they're going to make a start, it's not going to be so much of a head scratcher. So with Milenkovic in for Bolly, did you have any concerns about the big Serb making his debut?
No, I just think with the sheer number of minutes he's played, how many games he's played, in Syria, I understand it's a different league, but it's still a challenging league nonetheless. Not to the same level as the Premier League, but again, still plenty of experience. So I wasn't quite concerned about that, and frankly, I was excited to see what he would do in this league and how he'd fit into the framework of what Nuno is doing, and he did it brilliantly, and as I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. But not concerned at all. And in America they talk about it, they refer to it as a pitch count, as it were, and I think Bolly has to be on some sort of thing like that because he's obviously a little bit older. He's had some injuries, and so it's good to know that you have that kind of guy backing him up. So if Milenkovic's form dips for any reason, he gets injured, then we always have that sort of safety net. And he's a brilliant safety net, right? I mean, statistically, they're very similar. He's just a little bit older, obviously, and so with a little bit more injury history. So great to see, played well. Excited to see what he'll continue to do moving forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think I said before in our match day episode that Nuno will have brought Milenkovic in to start. So him going straight into the 11 now he's available perhaps wasn't going to be such a surprise. And what's really good about having Milenkovic in that squad is that we had Bolly to turn to for the first game, nice and fit and a great player, and served as well. And we want him in that squad. But it wasn't so much that we desperately had to play Willy Bolly on Saturday. Milenkovic was back. He's the first choice. He goes straight back in. Last season, we didn't really have that. If Bolly was available, you kind of felt Bolly had to play because he was the strongest option. Felipe really gave us a great first season when he joined us. But last year, obviously, the injuries and his legs going a little bit, the certainty and the confidence in Felipe perhaps had dropped. So when Bolly was fit, Bolly had to play. Bolly is still fit, but of course, Bolly's not playing now because Milenkovic is the number one. It keeps Bolly's legs nice and fresh. So rather than wait for him to play and get injured, he's still there training and still there as a really solid option to come off the bench when needed. So I'm really excited about the pairing of Milenkovic and Murillo going forwards. Word on Anderson then. So into the midfield, the opening 25 minutes, Dan, let's talk about that and sort of 25, 30 minutes or so and how the game started to pan out. It looked to me like Forest were just dominating the ball. I mean, I know the possession stats later obviously showed Southampton had more of the ball, but in actual fact, the real chances and the real good side of the game all seemed to be on Forest's shoulders, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, we looked like we were in control of the game without having the ball necessarily that much based on the possession stats, like you say. And that's kind of what we predicted would happen, isn't it? That's their style, is to play lots of short passes, to keep hold of the ball, but not necessarily get that far in terms of penetrating opposition teams. So it kind of was good to just see how much in control we were, how much they played into our game plan. We pressed quite high up the pitch a few times. There was one with Elanga on the right hand side where we really pressed them right up to their byline to nick the ball back and things like that. So that was clearly our game plan, was to put them into those little traps. And yeah, it worked out for us. We definitely created some good chances. I think there was the cross for Chris Wood to head, which was not the best outcome considering how advanced Aina was with nobody between him and the goal. So we probably should have scored there to go 1-0 up after like 15 minutes or so. But yeah, after 25 minutes, we definitely should have really been a goal up with that control of the game.
Yeah, I was texting you guys in our group, and I think I was saying I'm a bit worried if we go into half time at 0-0 with these chances. Is it going to come back to bite us? How concerned were you, Richard, that we were creating chances but not scoring?
Yeah, I think there's always invariably that fear because of what we've seen over the first two seasons with our club. It's been opportunities beautifully orchestrated on the counter, but seemingly not be able to get that pass in the final third or finish that to get that goal. And so it did have a bit of an air of that again. And the relentlessness of how we played in that first half, it was like, okay, are they sort of used up all their energy? Kind of similar to what we did against Bournemouth, where that press was there, it was heavy, and we were constantly fighting for the ball back whenever we lose possession. Is it going to be something that mirrors that? But ultimately, it wasn't necessarily. And I think it was Kyle Walker-Peters had one shot on goal, and that was really their only real significant chance of the match. So invariably, even though, like as you pointed out, the possession stats didn't speak to that, the eye test and just everything else did, because I think we had 8 shots on goal to their 1, and I think they had total of 5 shots cumulatively. So definitely a dominating performance, which is what you want, just not the finishing that we need. And clearly that's why we're looking at guys like Santiago Jimenez or even Nketiah to a degree, even though he doesn't have as many minutes logged as Jimenez does, and I know we'll get into that later. But yeah, definitely agree with you though. It was a little bit concerning, leading into halftime, that this is going to be something that come back to haunt us, a late goal scenario or what have you.
I felt that we were doing loads right, but when it comes to that final third or that final moment, things looked a bit rushed, and that Aina chance down the left, I think, sums that up, because it was a great piece of play. I think it's him and Callum Hudson-Odoi linked in together, and Aina's overlapping and clipping it over the defender who made that tackle. So he's going clear. And as soon as he did that, I'm screaming at the TV, drive in, and Orlando's screaming, drive in, because the whole left-hand side of the pitch just opened up. And if he'd driven into the box, he was clear through to either get a shot off or really pick out a better pass. Wood might have dropped into the penalty spot area, or someone else might have found space, and it would have been a much better shot. But what he did is he kind of paused, he looked up, and rather than have a clear head, he's decided to cross it in with Wood getting a header on goal, but leaving him with a lot to do. And I just felt that was an example of making the wrong choice. And it sounds very critical to say that, but it's still something they need to work on, is making those choices to kind of carve these teams open. So I was a little worried that, we were making these chances, or we were creating enough in the first 2/3 of the pitch, but at last part of the pitch, we were letting ourselves down. And then, of course, the glaring chance, Dan, probably the best chance the first half, and the ball comes across and Chris Wood, just fires it across the 6-yard box. And there's Milenkovic sticking out a leg, shinning it wide. At that point, what were you thinking?
Yeah, what a debut it would have been for him if that had got in. I mean, I'm not sure whether Chris Wood was having a shot there or playing it across. He sort of, afterwards, he reacted as if it was definitely a cross. But there was part of me thinking, was he trying to actually hit the target himself? Because he did fire it across, which made it very difficult in some ways to control what you were going to do with your feet for Milenkovic, even though he was at the far side of the goal. So yeah, look, it should have gone in. I'm sure probably 9 times out of 10 it does go in, but can't really pin that on Milenkovic. It was just a symptom of that first half and what we were, that little percentage off being able to convert our dominance, really. And I think just going back to what you touched on with Einer's chance, most of our chances in that first half were falling to the fullbacks. They were kind of the spare players that we were leaving space for. And it's kind of a consistent thing with us, is that Einer and Williams look good in games. They're really good on the ball, but that final decision and that final chance creation is lacking. That's what sort of restricts us to maybe scoring 2 or 3 in a game, because we don't take advantage of those chances enough. Because I think Nico had 4 shots in the first half, for example, which was the most of any of our players, but we didn't quite, none of those were really testing the keeper in the first half.
Yeah, and Alex Moreno to come in. We talked about him on Saturday in the pre-match episode. And so we might see an enhancement down that left-hand side with what you were talking about with those fullback areas, because we do get our fullbacks involved an awful lot, and Nico with those shots as well. It just felt like we were going to be the nearly men again, going into half-time 0-0. As I say, dangerous to not have scored. What were you thinking at half-time, Richard? Because I was just pretty certain that Southampton were going to come out and offer more, and that's exactly what they did. When they started to be more involved in the early moments, or first 15, 20 minutes of the second half, did you think that our chance had gone, Rich?
Yeah, a bit, because we again, similar to the Bournemouth thing, because they came out, I think, guns blazing, as it were, for the second half as well, and so it seemed like we were sort of it was a trajectory towards that letdown moment again. We clearly, I think, took our opportunities when they came, but obviously once again couldn't finish. But yes, it did very much seem to track with what we've seen previously, and what a wasted opportunity. Because my first thought was, we have away wins for us has been such a premium. We just haven't played well away from the City Ground, as everyone's aware. And so it once again sort of felt like that moment of like, this is an opportunity where points are going to get dropped again. And, it wasn't from a winning position scenario like we've seen so often as well, but it certainly was that inconsistency of play for whatever reason. I don't know what that is, if it's a mental lapse, mental sort of scenario, physical, whatever it is, but it definitely seemed to be trending towards that, which was definitely disconcerting in the first few minutes. And things settled down, obviously, but and we got a goal as we needed to, and we should have done. So, yeah.
A word on Sangare, Dan, because I thought that he had a pretty decent first half performance. Him and Elliot Anderson in the midfield, I thought was working quite well. Anderson was getting some good interceptions in, as was Sangare. So I was feeling very optimistic about both of those players in that midfield in that first half. Then going into the second, Sangare got booked, and this just seemed to cause him to drop. He lost some momentum. He got a little bit sloppier. Should we read too much into that, Dan?
It's hard to know what you would read into, isn't it? I mean, I can't remember. There was one really sloppy pass that he made where he was. I don't know if he was passing to Murillo. It was very close to opening us up because he just underplayed the pass and left a lot for the player to do. So there was one of those. I can't remember if that was before or after the second yellow card, but yeah, he definitely dropped off, and I don't know why that would be. You've had your 15-minute break at halftime. he should have another 20 minutes in him at least of kind of freshness to still be at the same pace as the first half. So I don't know what you would read into it. I'm sure he's fit enough to play 90 minutes if he really has to. So is it concentration? Is it just that switch off? Did Southampton do anything different to kind of target him and put a bit more pressure on? He wasn't as involved in this game as Bournemouth, I don't think, generally. So yeah, hard to know what to read into it, but he definitely did drop off.
I was wondering whether or not it was actually the getting booked itself that kind of had an effect on him, because after that booking, that was almost like the marked moment in the game where his game seemed to change. Whether or not he was just being overcautious, didn't want to pick up a second yellow, it just seemed to have got into his head that he was on a yellow and didn't want to make any mistakes. But look, I still think there's promising moments from Sangare, and I was quite vocal about him last season, and ready to write him off. And that was perhaps a little bit of a gung-ho moment. We get emotional and we say things after games that perhaps on reflection, you want to be a bit more balanced. But being as balanced as possible. He's had a great pre-season. He played well against Bournemouth. He's had a decent enough first half, albeit then dropping off. So for me, he's still the starting centre midfielder. And I can only see him getting stronger and stronger. And he's still got a lot more of a ceiling to rise up to. So I'm not too worried about him. Are we going to see, Richard, the same midfield pairing, do you think, in the next game starting at home to Wolves, with Anderson now perhaps getting that first choice start now Danilo's out?
You would think so, just based off of the differential in terms of ceiling versus floor that you, in comparison to Yates. I mean, Anderson hasn't, I don't recall off the top of my head, but he clearly hasn't had as many starts in the Premier League as Yates has, right? Yates is invariably the steady Eddie that we know him to be. He played well when he came on, played well certainly against Bournemouth. But I think Nuno's going to want to integrate Anderson because he's very young and he's got a lot of opportunity ahead of him. And I think the more that he's on the pitch, the more continuity and that he's going to build with those with the players around him. And I think his versatility in comparison to Yates, while Yates has been surprisingly front foot and attacking this season compared to last the first two, but I think it's something where it's just about that ceiling. For me personally, and I would imagine the same it's the same thing for Nuno. And he knows that once he's logged more minutes, he's going to only continue to progress because the talent is evident. Just a matter of getting his feet under him, and as well as getting some continuity and cohesion with the rest of the squad.
Second half, Southampton did come out and put under more pressure. They had more energy, more purpose, and as I said, I was a bit worried that our chance had gone. But the goal did come down. And take us through it then. Morgan popping up, excuse me, didn't have, I don't think, his most effective game. He had some really good moments. But what did you make of the Gibbs-White goal?
I think, yeah, we had a couple of chances from like the second phase of corners, didn't we? So again, Nico Williams being heavily involved, the ball came out to him quite a few times on that second part of the corners. And yeah, it's kind of nice to see that even though our corners on the day were not great deliveries, there was another way to still provide a threat. And obviously Gibbs-White kind of heads it into the defender, gets it back off the defender and knocks it in. Kind of a scrappy goal, but a good striker's almost goal. And I think what I'd say is that's the benefit of having taken Gibbs-White off corners is not, obviously a lot of people have looked at it and said, oh, his delivery is poor, let's get him off because of his delivery. But you could look at it slightly more positively and say that he's better to have in the box than Elanga or Callum Hudson-Odoi because, he's going to fight for those chances a little bit better. He's better in the air and he's going to get these kind of goals because he's got a little bit more of that scrappy instinct in around the box, I think.
The second goal I felt was going to be really important because, let's face it, hanging on to a 1-0 win away from home for any side is always dangerous, and Forest have proven that they can get clawed back. I think last year we gave away so many points from winning positions that, had we managed to stay in control of those games, then we would have never had a problem in terms of relegation or flirting with it. So we had Elanga tearing into the box, Richard, on a couple of occasions. And there was one standout moment where he's really torn in and taken a shot at McCarthy. when in fact he probably should have squared it for Chris Wood, and you could hear Chris Wood shout Anthony in the box. It was there on Match of the Day and for all to hear. That moment and those kind of moments, does that sum up still that we've still got a level of immaturity in our play? Because I think about other teams that are more consistent with scoring goals. And in those moments when you've got someone driving into the pitch, obviously I don't want to compare us to Pep Guardiola's Man City, because that would be a silly comparison. Obviously they're the team they are and we're the team we are. But you see players in his sides making those kind of runs into the box, and they don't take shots. They automatically, instinctively know their job is to cut it across. Their job is to find Haaland or to find a player in the box. And, we've seen them cut balls back for the likes of Rodri to fire it in. So like I said, I'm just using him as an example that when Elanga's bursting into the box, he's kind of tunnel vision towards getting a shot off. And we know that getting that ball across is going to be a better option. Is that level of immaturity still a cause for concern for us, Richard?
No, because I think it's just a matter of, I don't believe so. I think you contrasted with the very thing that you mentioned earlier with Aina, right? Because Aina should have gone into the box. He should have taken that more attacking sort of position and went for goal, versus this one where he needed to do the opposite, right? And in thinking about it, because whether you want to do this or not, he's always going to be compared to Brennan just because of the position he plays and the way that he plays, and they're very similar in that way. Brennan, to me, and to your point about Man City, the mental acuity of how they play the game is so high. It's not just about talent, because everybody on that pitch for Man City has talent. It's the way that they play the game mentally. And I think one thing that Brennan got progressively better at was getting the ball into the box. I mean, you saw a number of goals that were scored, whether that be across to Taiwo in that first season, because he had refined that element of his game. And I think Anthony Elanga will get there.
Took him a while, though. I mean, they were in that Southampton away. That Southampton away game when we won 1-0 was the perfect moment when he did cross the ball for Taiwo. And I can't remember the game, but the game before, he had a couple of opportunities to do the same and didn't. And it was almost like from one game to the next, he'd learned get that ball across. So he had his moments of not doing the right thing. But your point is well made, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the thing, is that and to that point, I mean, Anthony had been playing, granted, for Manchester United, which from a caliber of who you're playing against on a day-in and day-out basis, both in training as well as when you do get the opportunity to come off the bench, is going to be a much higher caliber than what Brennan was dealing with in the championship. But I think he definitely, you could see the growth through that first Premier League season that he had, and I think Anthony will get there. Skill set to skill set, they're very, very alike. And he did have moments last season where he looked more to play the ball into the box, whether that be an aerial cross or cutting it across the goal at a lower angle. He did seem to do that more. He seemed to grow from the fact that he doesn't go off sides as frequently. I mean, that was a horrendous problem at the beginning of the season last year, and he seemed to sort of correct that, which is good. So that the ability to play, to study the mental side of the game as opposed to continuing to improve physically is there. And you can't even deny how well he can cut through defenders, and he did so, I think, in another play where he ended up getting a corner out of it and shot with his less favorable foot. I think it was a left-footed shot that got deflected and went out. So, I mean, he's such a nightmare to deal with. And so over time, I would imagine by the end of the season, we're going to see a very different player. I have complete faith that will occur.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Going back to the first half in particular and the pressing game, Dan, what was really interesting for me and what was really good to see was a clear level of tactical input from the manager and the coaching staff. And it stood out that we had a game plan. And you mentioned before that real high press that Elanga nicked the ball right on their byline. And that wasn't just the only occasion we did that. And it stood out for me that, goodness me, Forest here, away from home, have a clear game plan. Now, I'm not saying that we've never had that before, but it felt like it really stood out in this moment. And, credit to Nuno. And how much of that is down to the fact that Nuno now has had a chance to work with the players in pre-season, as well as the back end of the second half of last season, rather, but the pre-season as well. He's got to know the players. The core players are still at the club. Elanga, Hudson-Odoi, the front four. How much of that press and that tactical input is down to Nuno now knowing his players better?
I think it's a big factor. I know when we did our season preview, I sort of suggested that I think Nuno will almost make us better away from home than at home going forward, because I think he does have, from his experience at Wolves, a certain way of playing, which all the reports said that, like the big teams and things hated playing Wolves because they were so difficult to break down and they always had a game plan. So I think that's what I was sort of looking forward to. I think with Southampton, they kind of make it obvious because Southampton have such a consistent sort of almost single way of playing. So that kind of helps as a manager of the opposition because you know what they're going to do. So you can kind of then be a little bit clearer probably in how you set up your game plan against it because they're not going to change. But at this level, often the difference in the game is how well the players can deliver the game plan. How do they stick to it? And obviously some of the stuff we've already discussed about Elanga and making those decisions, that applies when you're out of possession as well. How do you how consistently do the players, and this is why certain players keep getting picked that everyone says, technically they're not as good. It's because they follow the game plan. They're in the right place when they need to be. And in terms of actually contributing to the result, sometimes the technical stuff, dribbling ability and things like that aren't going to be as important in delivering a result as sticking to the game plan as you go through it. So yeah, positive sign. And comparing players, we've definitely got the better players than them. So it was just a case of let's stick to the game plan. And, obviously it worked out in the end, albeit a bit closer than we would like.
The 5 substitutions that we now can have, it feels like it's been around forever, but it's such a big game changer in terms of how a manager can affect the game. And so we brought off the bench Nico Dominguez, who I love and everyone knows. I don't think he had his biggest impact. A few wayward passes and possibly struggled to really get into the game as much as I would have liked him to have done. But Richard, we also saw more minutes for Taiwo Awoniyi. What did you make of Taiwo off the bench against Southampton, buddy?
I think he does what he does, right? He positions himself well. He's able to lay the ball off to teammates. I'm struggling to think of specifics, but I think comprehensively he just sort of seemed like, and with each successive match, now granted we're talking about 2 matches, but even somewhat in the preseason, he looks a little bit like he's starting to get his legs under him a bit more, which is good because we all know once that man is fit, he's clearly a matchup concern for any team that he's going to play. And I don't know, even with someone like Virgil van Dijk, I think he's still a problem for players who with that kind of experience and that kind of pedigree. So comprehensively, it's good to see him get in. Don't recall what time he came in. What time did he actually get subbed in?
It was more towards 70 minutes, I think, or 7.
Yeah,
maybe
which seems to be about
70 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, which seems to be about on par with what they're looking for, right? They're trying to get him progressively more minutes to hopefully get up to fitness. Now we'll see what happens if we bring in another striker, because then he potentially could be dropped down the depth chart a little bit as well. But it was positive in the sense that he impacts the game enough to where even when he's not scoring goals, he still causes concerns for the defense. They have to allocate people for him. They have to be cognizant of his presence on the pitch versus Wood, who I think is clearly a great finisher in a lot of ways, but I don't think he quite puts a fear into people as much as I think Taiwo would.
He was definitely showed his strength. There was that moment where he held Bednarek off and was turning Bednarek, and in fact it meant Bednarek had to foul him and pick up a yellow card. So in that moment it felt like Taiwo was back, and I think Dan, you in the
I thought that was it.
Quite kind of Taiwo's back.
Yeah,
and I agree. Back. I mean, it's great to see, because what I also love is that we don't have to rush him back. Chris Wood's fit, that's great, and he's proven that he can score goals for us. And I think the whole fan base is very happy to have Chris Wood start with everything he's done for us last season. He's really earned the respect, and I think that takes the pressure off a little bit. The club, it takes pressure off the whole scenario, and gives Taiwo time to get back in properly. We're not having to force Taiwo back on some more minutes, so it feels a lot more better. It feels a lot more better. Feels a lot better in terms of how it's being managed at the moment. So I'm feeling really optimistic. I think Taiwo is still a great player. You know, he's making his way back into the side, and it's being done in the right way, which is really good to see. We also saw some minutes late on for Jota Silva, the other one, Jota Silva getting off the bench, beg your pardon, to get his first minutes. So that effectively means that, you know, he's definitely not going to be joining Olympiacos on loan. And then in the dying minutes, getting Willy Bolly on to form a back three felt like the right thing to do. Now, I know away at Luton last season, we did the same thing. We went to back three, brought Felipe on, and it all unravelled, and they scored the goal. It was different this time. You know, Southampton were definitely not putting us under the kind of pressure that Luton were putting us under last season. And so it just felt like the right thing to do in that moment to bring on the level head of that big Willy Bolly to see the game out. And it worked charm. So I was really pleased that tactically, you know, he was making those kind of right decisions. But Dan, let's go to a couple of graphics that you've produced for us, because we were talking about Milenkovic and Anderson getting starts. And firstly, there's the Yates v Anderson comparison. So Yates we thought would come in, but he came off the bench late on again. And I will say I thought he had a really positive impact when he came on. But you put together a bit of a graph for us on the Yates v Anderson kind of comparison for the Bournemouth game and the Southampton game. So over to you, buddy, to take us through what you've found.
Yeah, I think with these numbers, I think the big caveat is obviously they were very different games. At Bournemouth, we had much more of the ball compared to the game against Southampton. And in terms of the midfielder's role, I think against Bournemouth, the plan was to get Yates more involved, to be a little bit more direct from midfield, whereas I think Anderson versus Southampton, his job was probably to sit in more and just guard against their threat, which is probably more through the middle. But you can see that, you know, in terms of attacking involvement for Anderson, it was a game where he wasn't as involved in an attacking sense at all, which is kind of backwards to what we'd expect. I guess going forward, it might be more a case that Anderson would play in a game like Bournemouth, where we're trying to be more direct through the middle. And Yates would play the away game where, as you can see in the stats there, sort of on the attacking stats in the top half there, Yates had much more of an impact versus Bournemouth. He had, you know, more touches, higher pass completion rate, and you know, in terms of shot creating actions, i.e. things that really impact the final third, he sort of double what Anderson's involvement was on Saturday. So there's definitely a difference in the performances there. It's just how much of that is down to the opponent and the game plan. You can see in the more defensive stats in terms of the number of tackles and the ball recoveries, that's what Anderson had to do against Southampton. He kind of had to do that role more. So we probably didn't see what we expect him to offer, which is more on the ball, because he was doing that more defensive role. So it was kind of a low key debut for him in that midfield role, I think, and kind of a surprise that we did flip it in that way, and it wasn't Yates doing that role. But I thought overall Anderson looked good, looked neat and tidy on the ball, but we didn't really see him, you know, get involved. Obviously, only 17 touches in the attacking third, whereas Yates versus Bournemouth 25. So, you know, that was the eye test last week as well, wasn't it? We were all impressed with how much Yates was driving us forward and getting involved in and around the box, and Anderson didn't really do that on Saturday. So, yeah, kind of interesting comparison. I thought just in terms of, let's say, potentially more game plan than about the players, but interesting to see.
It's interesting because if you took the names off that and I said which one's Yates and which one's Anderson, you almost might have switched them, because when Yates came off the bench against Bournemouth, you know, everyone knows that he was marauding, he was forward on the front foot. You know, he definitely wasn't playing as that kind of more of a holding player that we're used to seeing him do. And so the same with Anderson. Anderson, we're expecting to be on the front foot and making things happen and probing going forwards. But yeah, he's brought into the Southampton game, and he, as you can see from the stats, he's more defensive minded in along Sangare, which is perhaps more what you'd expect the Ryan Yates to do. And that's why we thought he'd play. I guess what it's good to see, Richard, is that both players can do both jobs. Yates can play front and back, and Anderson can do the same, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think you would inherently, I think from a long-term perspective, you're going to imagine Anderson will continue to get better and will surpass Yates just in terms of his capability long term. Like I was saying earlier about that differential between ceiling and floor. But Yates has shown a desire, I think, in this season to, whether that be he's being coached up by Nuno, whether it be confidence that he's helping to kind of instill in him. He's obviously the captain of this team. And so he clearly has that. He has that presence that you need from a leadership standpoint. But it is kind of exciting to see that, at least at this moment, current state, there's not a massive differential between the two of them. I think the only stat on there that you would question if you did flip them or you would normally flip them if you didn't have the names listed, is the fouls drawn, because he's a master at that, as we know. Ryan Yates. So that's probably the only one you'd be like, wait a minute, that's probably a Ryan Yates moment right there, which it is. So
he did it.
which you love about him, right?
That one on Saturday,
about
he literally in the corner, that was just pure Ryan Yates. You know, drawing that foul was unbelievable.
The brilliant thing is, just like we were saying with Taiwo, when the ball's not at his feet, even, he impacts the game, right? Ryan Yates, in the closing moments of game, is the perfect guy that you want on that pitch, because he will frustrate the heck out of the opposing team, right? Because he'll draw fouls, get free kicks, to kind of erode the time away, to get to pass the time quickly. So that's what you love about him. But yeah, I'm surprised, and I love these stats, because I think it proves that versatility that we have, both in terms of the first team to the bench, is much more. It's much deeper than we've had in the past. And I think Ryan Yates' presence, while he may not start every match at this point, and maybe it becomes less and less the case against a top 5-6 club in the Premier League, he's the perfect guy to have on that, because he will, for lack of a better word, neutralize the talent, because he won't allow them to get up the pitch, and he'll continue to get fouls from those moments and make it frustrating for opposing teams.
And I think it's good that we can trust Anderson to do that more defensive role, because that's always, the concern when someone comes in, when you're expecting them to be an attacking player, is, okay, they're going into a role where you have to be all round. And, that's kind of good proof from this weekend that he can be sort of trusted to do that.
Yeah, because that's been the question, right? Is he a 10? Is he an 8? And I think by showing what he did, to your point, Dan, and you're probably about ready to jump in there. Sorry, Greg, to cut you off. Similar situation, right? He's starting to sort of grow into more of an 8 role to replace that Danilo.
No, I was just going to move us on to the next slide. That's all. But
okay. Sorry,
I was going to. The comparison is very well made. So thanks for that, Dan. You also put together something similar for Willy Bolly and Nikola Milenkovic. Take us through this one.
Yeah, I had to get Bolly in somehow to this. I thought I'd just chuck this together. I think with this one, what I would say about Milenkovic's debut is, I don't think Southampton really gave as much to deal with. You'll see in there that Milenkovic didn't have to make any tackles according to the stats. I'm not sure. Sometimes the stats I don't really understand based on what you see, but according to these, he didn't really have to do any tackles. He was never isolated in a kind of a one-on-one with an attacker running at him or anything like that. Southampton never really disrupted our defensive game plan enough that there was much in the way of last-ditch tackles or things like that. So I don't think we saw much of a threat against us to be able to judge a defender, as we're going to see once we start playing Liverpool and Brighton and things like that. So it's kind of a low-key debut for him in a defensive sense. I thought he did what he had to do. He won his aerial duels, recovered the ball, made some interceptions. What was more interesting is when you look at those attacking stats. Again, we had less of the ball, so Milenkovic was always going to have less touches than Bolly did in the previous game. But five touches in the attacking third is big for a centre back, I think. I mean, I've not compared it across other teams of late, but that's a big impact. High pass completion rate and some progressive passes, and also contributing those shot creating actions, which again is it's not the assist, but it's a couple of steps back from the assist, which shows who's involved in our pattern of play up to those chances, which I think is in some ways is more of a sign than just the assist, which can just be a rebound off someone or whatever. So that is very positive from a case of how do we dominate the teams that we should beat. When we're playing teams like Southampton, they're obviously going to try and come up with a plan to deal with a Gibbs-White or an Elanga because they're the obvious threat. So then the question is, what do you do with the players that end up having more of the ball because the other team almost want them to have the ball, like a Bolly or Milenkovic? Can they have more of an impact on the game? So that's what I think Milenkovic showed. You know, he can have that, and if he'd got his goal, it would have been perfect debut for him to obviously get even more plaudits after the game. As you can see from the XG there, it did get an XG of 1, suggesting that he should have he should have put it away for that one.
We talked about the amount of goals we conceded from set pieces last season. It's well documented. And Richard and I, on various episodes, have said if we can just cut those down by a certain percentage, then it's going to massively help us in terms of the amount of points we get. Lo and behold, late on in the game, we give away a silly free kick in a dangerous area, final third. We set up our defensive unit, and lo and behold, the ball comes into the box, and the player that's coming forward, intercepting, getting his head on it straight away, Nikola Milenkovic. And in that moment, I thought that just sums up why he's there. A dangerous free kick that would have caused untold panic in the Forest defence last season. He's rising, getting his head in. And then not only that, he also shows that he's a little bit of a master of the S-housery, because he goes down like he's been shot and, you know, he's cleared the ball away, but he's using that moment to kind of kill the game, to dampen it, to get it stopped. And the Southampton fans were very unhappy about that. But, you know, that to me just summed up why we brought a player like him in, who can get his head on the ball in those dangerous set piece moments and can play the game. No, he's a professional. He knows how to play the game. He knows the tricks of the trade. So I'm super excited. He was the man of the match, you know, albeit we weren't under a lot of pressure, as you said, Dan, from Southampton. He just had an assured debut, and I would have loved him to have scored that goal. It would have just really capped it off perfectly. I'm conscious of time, so I want to move us along a little bit. We've more or less summed up the whole match, but just before we do move on, Richard, how important is that win for Forest?
Well, I know Dan mentioned, you know, in our prediction, preseason prediction episode that, you know, if it went the other direction, we need to still continue to be behind Nuno and behind the team and not get that letdown, because we all assumed that we can get 9 points out of these first 3 matches, right? But the fact that we're progressing towards the total that I think makes sense for who we're playing. I know Wolves is a different beast altogether compared to, you know, say a Southampton, but I think it's just that positivity, that momentum that we move into a home match against Wolves, and knowing that for once even though it's not the preferred way of doing it, we actually kept a clean sheet. Like Dan mentioned, like 180 some odd days that we had gone since keeping a clean sheet. So that's a huge positive, right? And a little boost for us as well. Now, granted, we were playing probably one of the worst teams in the Premier League, but we'll digress on that for the moment.
It hasn't mattered in previous seasons who we play. Sorry,
that's true.
It hasn't mattered who we play.
Good point. I was thinking the same thing, because invariably what we are doing is we're bucking the trend that we went again, even from the previous week. I mean, we collapsed in the 85th minute, 86th minute against Bournemouth and gave up that goal that we should never have given up, even though they were pressing and more attacking towards the end of the match. So it's nothing but good things to know that we kept a clean sheet. We got finally won a 1-goal difference match, which we tend not to do. We've lost a ton of 3-2 games, a ton of 1-goal or less game or 1-goal games that throughout the last 2 seasons. So there's a lot of things that we know are going against what our normal pattern is in terms of our wins and losses. So nothing but positive. And again, moving into a home match, I know we don't like using this terminology, but again, a very winnable game because of who we're playing and because of we're being at home.
Listen, we're on 4 points. We're unbeaten. 2 games have gone.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where we are on the table, but, you know, we have to hold our heads up and say we're doing what we should be doing. We're getting points against Southampton away from home, which we all said we should win, and we did win. The Bournemouth game was always going to be tricky, first game of the season. But as I said to you on a previous episode, season 1, season 2, Forest lose their first game of the season. This time round, we've got a point. So we're already on an upward trajectory. So it's all positive. Wolves on Saturday. We're going to be there, Richard, seeing a game together. Dan, you're going to be meeting us. Raf's coming as well. So if anybody is around on Saturday, we're going to be in the Trent Navigation before the match. That's where the Forest Focus crew generally meets, so we're hoping to see them as well. So if you are around on Saturday before the Wolves game, we're going to be in the Trent Navigation. It would be great to say hello to as many people as possible. So please do stop by and have a chat with us if you're around. Yesterday at the City Ground, our women's team were playing their first match of the season in a home sense, and they got off to a fantastic 7-0 win against Sporting Karlsruhe. It was 2-0 at half time, but then the Reds really ramped it up in the second half with 5 more goals. Molly Green scoring the pick of the bunch. I'm not sure if you've seen it on social media, but it was an absolutely outrageous effort from outside the box that arrowed into the top corner that I defy any keeper, male or female, to have saved. It was a stunning goal and a great win at home for the Forest women. So we're going to keep an eye on what they're doing. But I wasn't quite sure of how many people did make it across to the game for that. Ollie in the comments perhaps will know, but I'm hoping that as many people as possible will now choose to go and see the women's team. It's at the City Ground, and get behind the girls as much as you get behind the fellas. Make it as much of an atmosphere as can possibly be. There you go. Thanks, Ollie. 1,211 at the game for that. I'm not sure how that stacks up in terms of previous attendances that have been there, because I know the girls have played at the City Ground a couple of times previously, and also the other ground. I think, forgive me if I'm wrong on this, is it the Grange? Is that where they normally play? But it's good to see the numbers possibly growing. So Ollie and Holly have recently launched a brand new podcast focusing on Forest women. So I encourage you to go and find the new podcast hosted by those two. It's a Forest Women podcast. It's available for you to download from the usual places. I checked out their first episode last week. It's really good. Great content, doing really well, guys, and we support you fully with that, of course. We hope that if you're watching, that you will consider liking and subscribing. And, it does us a favor. The numbers go up when we get subscribes and we get likes. More people can find us. And as I say, it's just a click of the button if you'd be so kind. Right. Transfers. The Eddie Nketiah, Santiago Jimenez saga has taken another twist. It was all but done, we thought, with Eddie Nketiah joining us, Dan. And we were talking about him on Saturday and how much of a difference he would make. And I stand by all of that. I'd still love him to join. But it broke last night that it's broken down. For some reason, it seems now that there can't be an agreement, or it isn't an agreement between the player himself and the club. We thought terms had been agreed last week. It was disclosed, I think, Fabrizio Romano had disclosed that the terms have been agreed, but now it's broken down, and all of a sudden Ornstein and Romano are both coming out that it's all but dead, and Forest have gone back in for Santiago Jimenez. What do you make of all that, Dan?
Yeah, I definitely had it in my head that he was pretty much our player. Almost hoping it was announced before Southampton. It seems now even the people that were in the know weren't in the know last week in terms of quite what was agreed or not. So it's difficult to know what to make of it now in terms of which is more likely. Is this just a final negotiating ploy from either Arsenal or Nketiah on that side of things to just say, no, not interested, sort of, pretend to walk away and hope that Forest go back with a slightly better offer, whether it's transfer fee or wages, whatever's, or just clauses. I mean, we've seen the one suggesting it might be related to relegation wage clause and things like that, which, obviously none of us are really thinking about relegation this year, but clearly someone in negotiations worried about it. So yeah, disappointing that it's become less certain for us just because we obviously lose another few days of that player, getting settled in for that Wolves game coming up. So he starts to get, it'd be good if he was already in the squad announced today or whatever and had a full week of training. Whereas now we're back to probably this is going to be a deadline day decision, isn't it? It's going to be, does Arsenal become desperate at the last minute and go, all right, actually we'll agree to our terms on our side of the deal? Do we increase our offer, or do we end up finding that actually the Jimenez deal is just too good for us to ignore? Who knows?
I read somewhere last night as well. I'm not sure if there's any truth in this, and because I'm reading so much from different people, forgive me for not name dropping who it was, but it was someone saying that we were never not still in for Jimenez, even though the Nketiah deal was what we thought all but done. It wasn't the case that we were still not in for Jimenez, which made it clear that we were still trying to do both deals. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, I know I'd mentioned, could we be looking to do both? We'll perhaps never know. But with us now turning the volume up again, Richard, on Santiago Jimenez, I also noticed today that someone is mentioning Andreas Pereira as an option. And I know he's not a striker, but he's a very much forthright attacking midfield player. So Fulham's Andreas Pereira is being mooted as someone for us showing interest in. So the deadline is on Friday. It's this Friday at 11 p.m. So we play Wolves on Saturday and on 31st. The deadline is August 30th at 11 p.m. So everything will be done and dusted by the end of this week, by before the game against Wolves on Saturday. So there's still lots to happen. And as you say, Dan, as well, there's plenty of manoeuvring and last minute deals and poker faces in play. So to ask you, Richard, how you see all this panning out is like asking someone to give the lottery numbers for this weekend. But what do you make of it all?
Yeah, because we were getting similar reports, right, when Nketiah, like you mentioned, in terms of its closeness of completion, and then now we're getting sort of like, okay, well, I'm assuming Feyenoord's probably waiting to see if there's any other teams that come out of the woodwork, as it were, like in the last minute. It seems like from a price point standpoint, we're pretty much there. It seems like from the player standpoint, even though there's some questions at one point as to whether he wanted to come to us, I think he probably saw it from where the teams are in terms of their league positioning. He probably saw it as a step down, not from the quality of the league standpoint, clearly. But I got a feeling it's good. We always do this. We always have one right at the deadline. I think Sangare was the same way, right? So it feels like it's probably going to get there, because I think our owner, is well documented as an ambitious guy. And this is a 23-year-old striker who his comparisons are pretty high praise with some other players in Europe. And so he's a goal scorer. He's a shot creator. He gets assists. He's progressive with his passing. He's successful in terms of the ball at his feet and taking on. And all those metrics, especially in the goal scoring, assists, and shot creation, are elite metrics. Now, again, we're comparing that to a person who played in Eredivisie league versus a Premier League, and the kind of quality that he's going to face. But there's nothing but excitement from my perspective. I mean, Nketiah would have been great, but I actually think the ceiling on this player is higher, and he's a couple years younger. So we'll see. I think it'll get across the line, because it's clear we want to get that one of these types of players in ASAP, but it will probably be an 11th hour moment, which is, I know, incredibly frustrating for all of us, because time is rapidly running out. And as Dan pointed out, it'd be great to get him in to start seeing how he fits in tactically and formationally. But regardless, I think it'll happen. Things
always do seem to happen with Forest through the window, but definitely in the last days. So could it twist back, Dan, to Nketiah? Crystal Palace now seem to have a clear run at him. And so if they get him, I think I'd be even more annoyed, because I do like Nketiah. But is it possible it could even twist back to Nketiah again? I think you just alluded that, there's a chance we could be playing poker and seeing what's what in terms of a different fee or a different structure. Santiago Jimenez had come out and said, apparently, that he didn't want to go to Forest, but that now seems to have changed. Maybe he's had time to reflect, as you just touched on, Richard, that there was one journalist in the Netherlands who had come out and said, you'd be absolutely crazy not to go to Nottingham Forest. These chances to go to Premier League sides don't come along that often. However you view it, here's a Premier League side that are coming in for you, who aren't just in their first season. We're now looking to be established. We're third season in. So Dan, is still potentially over the line, but are we going to see any surprises, names that haven't been mentioned yet. There always seems to be 1 or 5 that come out in the last day where all of a sudden we get a name that we've not heard of, or someone who we know very well much about. But I'm thinking of, I don't want to say his name again because I don't think Batshuayi is going to be mentioned this time. But he came out of the woodwork, and then Akpom came out of the woodwork last time round. Are we likely to see another surprise name pop up, do you think, Danscape?
Well, yeah, just looking last deadline day, we signed 7 players on deadline day. With Murillo like the evening before, so kind of 8 really. So I don't think we're expecting anything like that. But yes, I still think there'll be a surprise name comes up. I think with Nketiah and Jimenez, it's inevitable that that's going to go to the wire because we're trying to sign a top player. We should be struggling to sign these players because we should be trying to get a player that's got a little bit of question mark if they want to sort of come down a level, in terms of current league position. So I think that goes to the wire for that reason, and that's not a bad sign. That's just that we're now trying to get players that other teams want and that existing teams want to get a good price for. So that's fine. In terms of where the surprise name comes from, the goalkeeper situation's gone quiet, and I still think that's probably at the top of the list for the club outside of striker. And I do like the other area I would strengthen is definitely that left-footed centre-back. I know obviously we've signed Carmo, who's gone over to Olympiacos straight away, but maybe there's a loan option there for a left-footed centre-back this season just to provide cover, because I think it would be very naive to go into the season risking a Murillo injury, which, as we saw with Danilo, can be completely innocuous thing that just rules someone out, and not have a left footer that could fill in there, because so much of our game has been our game plans have been established on the basis of having Murillo there and having that left footed angle of passes and things like that. So yeah, I think there'll be a surprise, probably goalkeeper, whether we go back to a name we already know or whether it just becomes, obviously there's hundreds of goalkeepers across Europe that we're not thinking about that the club might be looking at. So yeah, it'd be interesting on the goalkeeper situation, definitely.
I think you're right about the goalkeeper. I think I've got a hunch that Ramsdale was going to come to Forest because that is the name that was mentioned. He's still there. He needs game time. Southampton were looking at him. They've gone in a different direction. Bournemouth might be looking at him, but Neto's their captain. So I'm a bit unsure if that's going to come to anything. I think Ramsdale to Forest is still going to be very much alive in these last few days. And also comes down to squad numbers available in the squad. I think Danilo will be left out of the squad for obvious reasons, certainly till January. So I'm not quite sure, because I haven't got the count on me, how many places that frees up and if there's room for another loanee centre-back coming in or not. And I guess it just also depends on who else might go out the door. Could we see any surprise exits? Danilo was the one before we kicked off against Bournemouth, as in pre-season, that I had said, I wouldn't be surprised if something happened for Danilo. And then there were some whispers that Man United were interested, as well as others. But obviously that's now been put to bed with the injury. Are there any players in our squad, Richard, do you think that might end up leaving randomly? I mean, I know Atlanta, was it Atalanta, I think, interested in Nico Williams. Certainly we need to move on the fringe players, but Josh Bowler, Hwang, Dennis, I mean, we need to try and get them out the door. I think we're restricted in terms of amount of loanees that can go out, so we need some sales. But I'm thinking of the core group. I'm thinking of the players that we are having in our minds now as, going to be part of the squad for the season. Any of those players that we potentially might lose, mate?
Yeah, I don't think it's an impossibility that, for whatever reason, maybe someone comes in for Murillo at the last minute with an incredible offer. But Nico, definitely to me, and I think we mentioned this on our prediction podcast, because I said Moreira was going to be the surprise of the season, because I thought Nico, if he doesn't go before the end of this summer window, he potentially could go in the January window. I think, as you pointed out, he's been on the radar for multiple teams. I think at one point he was on the radar for West Ham as well. I wouldn't be surprised, and especially now with bringing in Moreno. Again, he hasn't started that many games, 13 on average the last couple of seasons. But he could fill in at left back, and I know he fits that mold. I know Dan loves that left-footed left back, right? And as you've stated, I mean, with having someone like Carmo as coverage. You know, if for some reason a crazy offer came in for Murillo towards the end of this window, you've got that guy that you can bring in potentially and play. And then again, with Aina being able to shift over to the right and Reno on the left, you've got a little bit more coverage if you did want to move Nico potentially to sweeten your financial position on someone like Jimenez or a surprise striker if there's somebody else out there. So yeah, that would be my bet. I'm in agreement with you. I think Nico is probably the most likely candidate of that group at this stage that are starting players.
So, as I said, the window closes on Friday. Whether we come on and do something on Friday, we'll have a chat about that as things progress. We're doing more episodes now that the season's up and running. There's more content. There's more things to talk about. And if it feels like, you know, if we don't hop on and get it discussed, then it's gone in an instant, and we're far behind. So we're going to try and bring you as much up to date, informative content as we possibly can. Certainly with the window closing, you touched on David Carmo there. He has now been announced by the club, so it was great to see a player that we had talked about, Richard, in our pre-season kind of selections as to who might be a good option for Forest and who they might look at. And David Carmo was one that we mentioned as being a really good, solid player. He is now a Forest player, albeit off to Olympiacos. I popped out a tweet on our account the other night because a few people were getting a bit upset about the whole Olympiacos thing. And I'm going to say it again, you know, the club know what they're doing when it comes to PSR. The Olympiacos club, I imagine, will have paid a loan fee for him for this season. So that negates the first year of amortization. He is on a 5-year contract. He's going to have a Forest career. He's a very good player. He's left-footed. He's 6'5". In a year's time, we are likely to lose Murillo. Let's face it, we thought he was going this season. If he's still here this time next year, then, you know, that I think might still be a surprise to people. And I'm not pushing him out the door. Don't think I am. But having David Carmo on our squad roster next season is going to be really, really important for us. So I'm all in favour. The relationship between the Marinakis clubs is never going to change, and we have to see it as a good thing. We're working it into our favour. So David Carmo going on loan to Olympiacos for the season, where he spent the second half of last season and won the Conference League with them, can only be a good thing for him and the player, and for Olympiacos and for the Marinakis Empire in general. So I'm all in favour of it, and I'm getting behind it. Whether or not we can bring another left back in, rather left-sided centre back in, we'll have to see. Quickly before we go, because I was going over just over an hour. We are running a fantasy football league, as I mentioned in our last episode, and we've had a couple of games, so we're still very, very early in. Propping up the table at the bottom, number 42, Richard Spray, has still a little bit of work to do. I don't want to give you too much of a grinning, because I know that you didn't do anything with your team for round 2, and then we touched on before we came on that you had Solanke in as your captain, and so he was automatically subbed out for you, thankfully, by the game. And Emil Smith-Rowe as your vice, who scored, got you 20 points. So, you know, I think 57 points haul for a side that you didn't do any tweaks with is not that bad. So I think feedback would be: look at your team, make sure you know who's playing, and pick your captain wisely.
Pay attention. Is that your feedback?
Pay attention.
Priorities.
Pay attention. Not that I can say. Yeah, well, I was trying to get him in, but he's 15.1 million now. Raf is sitting at, he's dropped down to 31st. So he had a decent return at 65. I myself returned 78, sitting in 21st. My son Orlando, he had a really good week. He's got to 18th on 86. And then we're kind of going up. So Bolly, sitting in 4th, Mr. Dan Cook. I think you said you played your wild card, didn't you?
I played the free hit, which
hit.
Yeah, which I think you only get one of, do you, for the whole season? I don't know.
Yeah,
I can't remember. So I thought I'd do that because I'm quite happy with my team. Apart from this game week, I just thought I can't not have Haaland for this one, and I think that worked out probably in my favour overall. So yeah, I went for that.
Did you triple him as well?
No, because you can't do both at once. You can only
no,
do
of course
one.
you can't. No, you
Yeah,
can't.
so
Yeah.
I can only
Okay.
do the free hit, but I thought I still needed those sort of guaranteed goals.
So you've done well. You're sat in fourth, 87 points for the week. Paul Morley, another one of our crew. He's top 3 now. He's gone up to 162 overall, 97 points for the week. Sitting top of the pile, shout out to Sean Barr. He had a good game week, 105 points. Nuno numero uno is his team. I think you can still join if you'd like to get on board. The code is pinned to the Talking Reds X page. It's just a bit of fun, and so do come and get involved if you can. Okay, right, we're out of time. We'll leave things there. A great win for Forest at the weekend. It was really good to chat that through. Dan, thanks very much for joining us today.
No, thank you. Enjoyed it.
Good. Richard, we are going to have a chat off camera about the plan for the week. So we'll do that. But thanks very much for joining us from your brother's house in Worthing.
Yep. Great to be here. Once again, just great to be on the same time zone, to actually get rest and sleep. For once, I think I've actually been averaging about 10 hours of sleep, which has never happened to me in about 15 years since we had our first child. So this has been amazing. It's been a great holiday nonetheless.
Great. And there's still some of it to go. So yeah, we're looking forward to getting together at the weekend. So that's it. That's it for today's episode. Keep your eyes peeled on social media. We'll let you know when we're going to be back. But thanks for joining us on Talking Reds, and we'll see you soon.